It was supposed to be a tragic but simple case. A young woman found unresponsive, rushed to the hospital, declared a victim of her own despair. Her family was told she had taken her own life. Her death certificate listed suicide. The case was considered closed. But what if everything they were told was wrong? What if the truth was buried beneath years of control, manipulation, and fear? What if the man who carried her coffin was the very reason she was in it? This is the story of Katie Simpson, and the story they didn't want you to hear. Katie Simpson was 21 years old, a girl full of life with dreams that reached beyond the rolling fields of County Armagh. She had a passion for horse riding, a career she loved, and a future she was building. She had no history of mental illness, no signs of distress, no reason to leave everything behind. And yet, on August 3, 2020, her brother-in-law, Jonathan Cresswell, made a chilling call. "She's not breathing. I thought she was, but she's not." The ambulance rushed to the hospital. Katie was placed on life support, but she never woke up. Doctors were puzzled. The injuries didn't match a hanging. There were bruises, not just on her neck, but on her arms, her legs, her body. Why would a suicide victim have defensive wounds? Why was she found half-dressed? And the most haunting question of all, why did she tell someone, just days before her death, "No way. He'll go crazy. Please don't. He'll kill me"? Katie's death wasn't just a tragedy. It was a cover-up. And the deeper we go, the darker it gets. The moment Jonathan Cresswell entered Katie's life, something changed. At first, he seemed like a respected figure, deeply embedded in the horse-riding community, a family man, a provider. But behind closed doors, there was another side to him. He had access to her money, her phone, her social media passwords. He dictated where she went, who she talked to, even who she dated. He had a past no one wanted to talk about, a violent relationship, a history of strangulation, threats, and coercion. But still, people trusted him. How does a man with a criminal record convince an entire community to ignore his past? How does someone hold so much power over a young woman until she has no way out? Katie was in too deep, and when she tried to break free, she paid the ultimate price. After Katie's death, Jonathan acted the part of the grieving brother-in-law. He stood at the funeral. He cried in front of mourners. He carried the coffin. He shook hands, accepted condolences. But there was one problem. When doctors examined Katie, they found something disturbing. She had injuries that didn't match suicide. She had wounds that suggested she fought back. A nurse became so disturbed by Jonathan's presence that she went to the police. She told them, "Something isn't right." But when police checked Jonathan's record, they only found traffic offenses. They missed his past conviction for domestic abuse. They missed the warning signs. Katie's case was closed, labeled a suicide, and the man who had controlled her for years, he walked away, free. But that's not the end. Katie's mother didn't believe it. Her family had doubts. The riding community started whispering, and when the truth finally came out, it shocked everyone. Because Jonathan Cresswell, he was about to face justice. Or so they thought. But then, something happened that no one expected. Something that ensured he would never answer for what he did. This is the case of Katie Simpson, and this is the truth they tried to bury. Katie Simpson grew up in County Armagh, Northern Ireland, a place where life was supposed to be simple, where neighbors knew each other, and where traditions held strong. A town of rolling green fields. A town where the sound of hooves echoed across open pastures. A town where dreams were meant to take flight. Katie was one of those dreamers. From the moment she could walk, she was drawn to horses. Her childhood was filled with early morning rides and late afternoons at the stables. By the time she was a teenager, she wasn't just another rider. She was one of the best. Show jumping, racing, training. She did it all, and she loved every second of it. Her family described her as fearless in the saddle, endlessly kind, and filled with an energy that could light up any room. She was the kind of girl who would sacrifice her weekends to help a friend, who would spend hours caring for injured horses, who dreamed of one day running her own stable. Katie had no history of depression, no history of mental illness, no reason to take her own life. So what really happened? Why did everything change in August 2020? Why did the life of a bright, passionate 21-year-old end so suddenly? And more importantly, why was one man always lurking in the background? Katie wasn't just another horse rider. She was respected, admired. She worked at a stable yard, surrounded by people who shared her love for horses. She trained, she competed, she won. She spent every spare moment at the stables, riding, laughing, building friendships. The riding community was supposed to be a safe place, but it wasn't. Because there was one man who had deep roots in that world. One man who had been watching her since she was a child. One man who had slowly tightened his grip around her life. Jonathan Cresswell. A man whose charm masked something far more dangerous. Katie's family didn't notice it at first. The way she started keeping secrets, the way she withdrew, the way she stopped making decisions for herself. But looking back, the warning signs were everywhere. Why did she start asking for money? Why did she avoid certain conversations? Why did she suddenly become so fearful of one particular person? Jonathan Cresswell wasn't just anyone in her life. He was her brother-in-law. He was a man with influence. He was a man who had done this before. What kind of power does someone have over a young woman to make her question her own freedom? And more terrifyingly, what does a man like that do when he feels he's losing control? As 2020 rolled in, something in Katie changed. Her friends noticed it. Her family noticed it. But no one knew what was really happening behind closed doors. Her texts became shorter. Her excuses became more frequent. And her smile, the one everyone knew and loved, started to fade. And then came the moment that changed everything. The moment Katie met someone new. His name was Shane McCluskey. He wasn't part of the manipulation. He wasn't part of the control. He was just a boy she liked. A boy who liked her back. For the first time in a long time, Katie had something of her own. But that wasn't allowed. Not under Jonathan's rules. Because Katie wasn't just another person in his life. She was his possession. And when she started slipping away, he made sure she wouldn't escape. Looking back, the signs were screaming at everyone. Her sudden fear, her desperate secrecy, her text to Shane, "No way, he'll go crazy. Please don't, he'll kill me." If Katie was afraid of Jonathan, why didn't she just leave? If she knew what he was capable of, why did she stay? Because that's the thing about psychological control. It doesn't happen overnight. It's not as simple as walking away. It's years of grooming, manipulation, fear, and dependence. It's being trapped in a life you never meant to have. It's believing there's no way out. And for Katie, there wasn't. Not alive. The message that sent Jonathan into a rage. The moment he decided she had to be silenced. And the horrific truth behind what really happened that night. This is the case of Katie Simpson. And this is the truth they tried to bury. Every crime has a villain. Some hide in plain sight. Some build reputations so strong, so carefully crafted, that no one questions what's beneath the surface. Jonathan Cresswell was one of those men. To the world, he was a respected figure. A man whose life revolved around the prestigious horse riding community. A trainer, a mentor, a family man. But what happens when a man like that has too much power? When he decides that power isn't enough? When he doesn't just want control over his own life, but over everyone else's? What happens when that power turns into possession? This is the truth about Jonathan Cresswell. And this is the life he built in the shadows. Jonathan Cresswell wasn't born a monster. He became one. For years, he carried himself like a king among commoners. Loud, brash, always drawing attention, always commanding respect. People admired his confidence, mistook it for charm. They didn't see what was lurking beneath. Jonathan had one weakness, one constant need that defined everything he did. Control. And for a man like that, control was never enough. He needed obedience. He needed submission. And when he didn't get it, he took it by force. How does a man go from being respected to being feared? How does he manipulate an entire community into defending him, even after they knew what he was capable of? It started long before Katie. It started with another girl. Her name was Abigail, and she was the first to escape. In 2008, Jonathan Cresswell met Abigail. She was young, she was naive, and she had no idea what he really was. At first, he was everything she wanted him to be. Funny, charming, thoughtful, but slowly things changed. The insults started, the isolation, the control. By the time Abigail realized what was happening, it was too late. She was trapped. And Cresswell, he was just getting started. Most couples spend Valentine's Day celebrating love. For Abigail, it was the day she almost died. They were sitting in his car. An argument started, one of many. But this time, Cresswell didn't just yell, he hit her. Again, and again, and again. And then, he wrapped his hands around her throat. What kind of man chokes a woman knowing she's powerless to stop him? What kind of man looks into her eyes, sees the terror, and keeps going? For Abigail, that should have been the end. But Cresswell wasn't finished. One night, after reading a text message from an old male friend, he snapped. He drove her into the woods, threatened to kill her, attacked her for hours. By the time she found the strength to run, she was barely alive. But she ran. And finally, she did what no one else had done before. She went to the police. Abigail gave a 19-page statement detailing the horrors she endured. It was enough to put Cresswell behind bars, or so she thought. He was convicted, sentenced to 6 months in prison. 6 months, not years, not life. 6 months. What message does that send to abusers like him? That you can strangle a woman, beat her, threaten her life, and walk free before the year is over. Because that's exactly what happened. And when he walked out of prison, he returned to the only place that had ever truly protected him, the horse riding community. When Cresswell got out of prison, there was no outrage, no disgust, no whispers of warning. Instead, there was a party. The very same people who knew what he had done, who knew the kind of man he was, welcomed him back with open arms. Why? Because to them, Jonathan wasn't a criminal. He was a horse-riding champion, a charismatic leader, a man who had simply made a mistake. And in their world, reputation was more important than the truth. What happens when a predator realizes he can get away with it? What happens when he sees that people will always defend him, no matter what he does? He does it again, and this time he doesn't stop, because this time he had a new target. Her name was Katie Simpson, and she never stood a chance. Katie was just 10 years old when Cresswell started his game. At first, he was kind. He paid attention to her, encouraged her, made her feel special. This is how it always starts. A child, too young to understand, slowly pulled into a world they don't realize is dangerous. Cresswell had time, years to make her trust him. Years to make her dependent on him. And when she grew older, that control tightened. Slowly, he took over her finances, her social media, her phone, her life. If he controlled where she lived, who she talked to, and even her passwords, then he controlled her entire existence. What happens when a girl doesn't even realize she's a prisoner? What happens when she finally does, but it's already too late? Because by the time Katie understood the danger, there was no way out. For years, Cresswell had been the only man in Katie's life, the only person who made her feel protected, the only one who decided what she could and couldn't do. But when she met Shane McCluskey, everything changed. For the first time, someone else was paying attention to her. For the first time, she had something Cresswell couldn't control. And for a man like him, that was unacceptable. When he found out about Katie and Shane, something in him snapped. He sent a message, a simple, chilling message. You need to reply to my snap, right effing now. Why would an innocent man send a message like that? What was he so afraid of? Because if Katie was free to love someone else, then she was free to leave him. And Jonathan Cresswell was never going to let that happen. The message that sealed her fate. The night she was forced into the back of a horse box. The chilling truth about what really happened behind closed doors. This is the case of Katie Simpson. And this is the truth they tried to bury. Katie Simpson had finally felt something she hadn't in years. Freedom. That night, she wasn't trapped in Cresswell's control. She wasn't walking on eggshells. She wasn't living in fear. She was just a girl, spending the night with someone who made her happy. Shane McCluskey. He wasn't part of Cresswell's world. He wasn't watching her every move. He wasn't demanding anything from her. He was kind. He was gentle. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Katie could breathe. After he left that morning, she sent him a text. I'm glad you came. She meant it. But then, something changed. Her next message was different. Suddenly, she wasn't relieved. She wasn't happy. She was terrified. Please don't tell anyone we were together. No way. He'll go crazy. Please don't. He'll kill me. What had just happened? What made her go from feeling free to feeling trapped again? Because the truth is, Katie wasn't free. She never had been, and she knew it. Because Jonathan Cresswell had just found out. The message came through like a bullet, a Snapchat notification. Short, direct, terrifying. You need to reply to my snap right effing now. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a request. It was a command. And Katie knew exactly what it meant. She had disobeyed him. She had spent the night with someone who wasn't him. And now? Now, she would pay. What kind of fear does it take to beg someone to erase any proof that you were with them? What kind of terror makes a young woman say, "He'll kill me," and mean it? Shane didn't understand. Katie, is it not just easier to say the truth? But Katie already knew the truth, because she had been living it for years. August 2nd, 2020. Katie tried to act normal. She went to a horse show, surrounded by the people who had known her since childhood. But no one knew this was the last day they'd ever see her alive. Because Jonathan was there too. Watching. Waiting. And when the show ended, he didn't let her leave on her own. Instead, he forced her into the back of a horse box. And from that moment on, Katie Simpson disappeared. No one saw her. No one heard from her. No calls. No texts. No activity. For hours. What was happening inside that horse box? What did Jonathan say to her? What did he do? Because when they finally returned home, Katie wasn't the same. That night, Jonathan never left her side. He was in her room all night. Not her boyfriend, not her family, him. 4:30 a.m. Her sister Christina woke up. She passed by Katie's bedroom, and when she glanced inside, her stomach dropped. Because there, lying in bed, was Katie, and beside her, Jonathan Cresswell. What was he doing in her bed? What had happened in the hours before that moment? And why did Katie look so completely and utterly broken? That morning, Shane woke up and did the same thing he had done countless times before. He texted Katie, "Morning, beautiful. What's the plan today?" Nothing. No response. Another text. Still nothing. Then his message was read. But Katie still didn't reply, because it wasn't Katie reading the message. It was Jonathan. And in that moment, something changed. Because just minutes later, Katie Simpson went completely silent. She never answered another text. She never made another call. She never spoke again. What happened in those final minutes? Did she try to run? Did she fight back? Did she plead for her life? We may never know. But one thing is certain. By the time the sun rose that morning, Katie Simpson was already gone. Jonathan's chilling 911 call, the injuries that didn't match his story. The nurse who begged police to investigate, but instead of arresting him, they let him go because they believed the lie. This is the case of Katie Simpson, and this is the truth they tried to bury. The call came through at 8:18 a.m. on August 3rd, 2020. A man's voice, rushed, frantic, desperate. "She's not breathing. I thought she was, but I don't think she is." He wasn't calling 999. He wasn't calling an ambulance. He was calling Haley Robb, a woman he was having an affair with. Why would a man who just found his sister-in-law hanging call his mistress before anyone else? Why wouldn't he immediately dial for help? Unless help was never the goal. Haley Robb was the one who called 999. She gave them Jonathan's number. And when dispatch connected, Jonathan was already driving. He wasn't waiting for paramedics. He wasn't performing CPR. He was racing away from the house. Katie's body was in the car. The dispatcher told him to pull over. "You need to stop the vehicle and begin chest compressions." Jonathan refused. No, we're going to the hospital." His voice wasn't broken with grief. His breathing wasn't heavy, not like someone who had been running upstairs, cutting down a rope, or desperately trying to save a life. The dispatcher pressed again. "Sir, we need you to stop and begin CPR." Jonathan's response? No. Why? Why would a man who just found a young woman hanging, who was supposedly still breathing, refuse to stop the car and try to revive her? What was he trying to get away from? Or worse, what was he trying to cover up? Because when the paramedics finally caught up to him, something wasn't right. And they saw it immediately. When emergency responders reached the car, they expected a suicide victim. Instead, they found something much worse. Katie's body wasn't fully clothed. She had bruises that didn't match a hanging. There were wounds on her arms, her legs, her body. Her thigh was bruised. Her hands showed signs of struggle. And most disturbing of all, there was evidence of bleeding. Bleeding from places that suggested something else had happened before she died. DNA swabs were taken, but before they could process them, Katie was already being written off as another tragic suicide. What were they afraid they would find? Because for Jonathan, it wasn't just about controlling her in life. It was about controlling the narrative in death. And he almost got away with it. At the hospital, Jonathan played his final role, the grieving brother-in-law. The man in mourning. Doctors worked to stabilize Katie, but she never woke up. For 6 days, she lay unresponsive. Machines kept her heart beating. Her family waited, prayed, hoped, but there was no miracle. On August 10, 2020, Katie Simpson was pronounced dead, and almost immediately, Jonathan Cresswell took control. He was at her bedside. He was in every conversation. He was the one answering the police's questions. And when they ran his record, the record that should have sent alarms ringing, they found nothing. Because somehow, his violent past was missing. The conviction for choking Abigail? Gone. The restraining orders? Nowhere to be found. To them, he was just a concerned family member. So when Jonathan told them Katie was struggling, this was suicide, they believed him. Not everyone was fooled. One nurse who saw the bruises on Katie's body, who saw Jonathan hovering over her like a shadow, who saw how he never left her alone. She knew. She went to the police herself, told them this wasn't right, begged them to look deeper, to investigate. But they didn't. Because by then, Jonathan had already won. Katie's death was ruled non-suspicious. Her case was closed. And Jonathan Cresswell, the man who had groomed her, isolated her, controlled her, and ultimately took her life, walked away. Because Katie's family knew the truth. Because the whispers in the writing community grew louder. Because even those who once defended him began to ask questions. And finally, the truth began to surface. But Jonathan had one last move left to play, and it would ensure he never faced a jury. This is the case of Katie Simpson, and this is the truth they tried to bury. The police finally start asking the right questions. The secrets Cresswell's inner circle tried to hide. And the moment that should have brought justice, but never did. For most families, when a loved one takes their own life, there's a moment of acceptance. The pain never fades, but eventually, they try to move forward. But for Katie's family, there was no acceptance, because nothing about this made sense. Katie wasn't suicidal. Katie wasn't struggling. Katie was afraid. And before she died, she told them exactly why. He'll go crazy. Please don't. He'll kill me. How do you ignore that? How do you bury your daughter knowing the man who lowered her coffin into the ground may have been the very one who put her there? Katie's mother couldn't let it go. She knew something was wrong. She had seen the way Jonathan controlled her. The way Katie withdrew from everyone. The way she wasn't allowed to make her own choices. And now she was gone. And the police weren't asking any questions. So Katie's family did what no one else would. They started fighting. Fighting to reopen her case, fighting to make sure Jonathan didn't get away with it. And soon, they weren't the only ones. Because the horse riding community had begun to turn on him. For years, Jonathan Cresswell had been untouchable. People trusted him. People believed him. People looked the other way. Even after he had been convicted of assaulting Abigail. Even after he had strangled another woman. Even after Katie Simpson's suspicious death. But something was different this time. People started talking. Whispers turned into rumors. Rumors turned into suspicions. Suspicions turned into accusations. And finally, the police could no longer ignore it. By the time authorities finally decided to look into Katie's death, months had passed. Evidence had been lost. Witnesses had been manipulated. And Jonathan, he had been living his life like nothing had happened. But then, police uncovered something chilling. Katie's phone was missing. A phone that should have been beside her at the time of her death. A phone that should have held her final messages. A phone that, when police pressed Jonathan about its whereabouts, he said didn't exist. But then, they found it. Buried. Hidden. Erased. Who hides the phone of a girl who took her own life? What was on it that Jonathan didn't want anyone to see? And more importantly, why wasn't this enough to arrest him? March 2021. 7 months after Katie died. Jonathan Cresswell was arrested for rape and murder. Finally, the police were seeing what everyone else already knew. Finally, Jonathan would have to answer for what he did. Finally, justice was coming, or so they thought, because almost immediately, Jonathan was released on bail. And what did he do? Did he hide away, awaiting trial? Did he show remorse? Did he disappear from public life? No, he was seen with young girls, smiling, laughing, living. Like he hadn't just been accused of murder. Like he wasn't a known abuser. Like he knew, deep down, he would never face consequences. And unfortunately, he was right. April 2024. The trial begins. Katie's family is finally going to hear the truth spoken out loud. Finally, the evidence is going to be laid bare. Finally, Jonathan Cresswell will be held accountable. The first day comes and goes. Witnesses take the stand. The prosecution starts their case. Jonathan is sitting in court, face unreadable. Then, on day 2 of the trial, everything stops. Because Jonathan Cresswell is dead. He never made it to court. He never faced a jury. He never answered for what he did. He was found in his home, gone. A man who spent his entire life controlling others had just played his final hand. Because even in death, he controlled the narrative. Katie Simpson was denied justice, her family was denied closure, and the man who terrorized her, he never paid for what he did. He controlled her in life. He controlled the story after she died. And in the end, he controlled how it all ended. So where does that leave us? How do you find justice when the guilty man is gone? How do you make sure this never happens again? Because Jonathan Cresswell should have been stopped years ago. When he choked Abigail, when he manipulated young girls in the writing community, when he controlled Katie so completely that she never saw a way out. So the real question isn't how he died. The real question is, how was he allowed to do this for so long? And how many more men like him are still out there? Katie's mother speaks. Her voice is strong, but broken. It's heartbreaking to know the suffering that monster put Katie through. You can't imagine anyone could do such a thing. Katie would have tried her hardest to fight back because she loved life. No court verdict, no sentence, no true justice. But Katie Simpson will never be forgotten, and neither will the man who took everything from her only to escape in the end. The world moved on, but Katie's family never did, because how do you move on from something like this? How do you grieve when there are no answers? How do you let go when the man responsible escaped justice on his own terms? For 3.5 years, Katie's family waited. Waited for the truth. Waited for justice. Waited for something, anything, to bring them peace. But peace never came. And Jonathan Cresswell? He didn't act alone. Because monsters like him rarely do. 3 women stood by him. They watched as he controlled Katie. They listened as he twisted the truth. They helped him cover up what he had done. They didn't ask questions, they didn't stop him. And even after Katie was gone, they continued protecting him, until the evidence became undeniable, until their loyalty was no longer enough. And finally, they were convicted for perverting the course of justice, for withholding the truth, for being complicit in the destruction of a young woman's life. But is that justice? A few convictions, a few prison sentences. Meanwhile, Katie Simpson is still gone. Let's be clear. Jonathan Cresswell should have been stopped years ago. He had already strangled a woman. He had already been convicted of violent assault. He had already proven, beyond a doubt, what he was capable of. But the system let him walk free. And because of that, Katie never had a chance. What if someone had listened? What if Abigail's case had been taken more seriously? What if the writing community hadn't protected a predator? What if the police had investigated Katie's death properly? The first time? Would she still be alive today? Because that's the real question. How many more women have to die before the system starts working the way it should? How many more red flags need to be ignored? How many more families need to bury their daughters before real change happens? They called it suicide. But the truth was darker than anyone expected. Katie Simpson didn't take her own life. Her life was taken from her, piece by piece, over years of control, manipulation, and abuse, until she had nothing left, until there was no escape. And in the end, even in death, Jonathan Cresswell won. He never stood trial, he never faced a jury, he never had to answer for what he did, because he took the coward's way out. And now, he's gone. But Katie? She should still be here. And the only way to honor her, the only way to make sure this never happens again, is to keep telling her story. Katie Simpson's story is not an isolated case. There are countless other victims. People trapped in controlling relationships, people being isolated, manipulated, threatened, people who feel like they have no way out. But there is a way out. There are people who will listen. There are people who will help. If you or someone you know is in a controlling or abusive relationship, please reach out. You are not alone. You are not powerless. And you do not have to suffer in silence, because Katie's story should have ended differently. And yours still can. This case deserves to be remembered. Katie deserves to be remembered. So if this story moved you, if it made you angry, if it made you question how something like this could happen, don't let it be forgotten. Subscribe to the Criminal Files for more stories that need to be told. Leave a comment. What do you think should have been done differently? Share this story, because the more people who hear it, the harder it becomes to ignore. And maybe, just maybe, the next Katie Simpson will be saved.